Greetings, my fellow nerdologists. Ambassador Kosh coming at you with a brand new video. Today, we're going to continue our exploration of the Babylon 5 universe, and as the thumbnail indicated, we're going to be covering Captain John Sheridan, or President John Sheridan. John Sheridan. So, um, honestly, of all the characters in Babylon 5, I liked Sinclair. I liked the ambassadors. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a guy myself. John Sheridan, honestly, was one of the most interesting characters to me in the entire series. And for a number of reasons why. And we'll go into not just his history in Babylon 5 TV show and the movies and so on, but the impact that he had personally on me. And, well, the best place to start, obviously, is the beginning. John Sheridan was a officer within Earth Force or anything. He served during the Earth Minbari War, as a lot of the main characters in Babylon 5 did. And we actually get quite a bit of interaction with him during the TV movie in the beginning, because he's very much he's at certain points our POV character. The first time we interact with John Sheridan is just before the beginning of the Human Minbari War, where he's actually brought in by one of the higher up officers in the military, and is given the opportunity to lead the expedition to do a reconnaissance mission to discover more about the Minbari race. And the interesting thing about John is the fact that he turns down the mission. Turns it down. He's like, I am loyal to my current senior officer, and he's like the guy that I'd be serving under. The guy's got a bad reputation for not handling first contact situations all that well. And he's like, I don't really want to be in a position where I have to buck my senior officer and possibly jeopardize my own career. And I think it's an admiral or general somewhere along those lines says, well, if you want to shoot your career in the foot, be my guest. Report back to your current post. And I think the reason why this first interaction with John Sheridan is so interesting is the fact that it shows a degree of loyalty, that he has a loyalty to those officers that he has served with, and the fact that he's not afraid of change, because obviously later on and everything in the season 2 of Babylon 5, he comes on as the commanding officer of the station. And the fact that amongst the main reasons that he is brought on is the fact that he's very well liked, he's very well respected within Earth Force, both the military and the government. And one of the reasons the fact that his father is an ambassador, or retired ambassador, I think, at this point. And his father was a very influential figure in his life, because the fact that his father was an ambassador amongst, I imagine, amongst the other alien races that humanity eventually started to make contact with, and so on. And it gave John a very interesting perspective on the world that he existed in, because at this point in human history, we had finally made contact with other alien races. And something that we learned about John later on in the series, and it's just kind of a throwaway line, is the fact that after he got out of high school or something along those lines, he goes to Tibet and he stays with the current Dalai Lama. And that gives a very richness and a depth to John's character, because he isn't just the staunch military officer. He's got a very good sense of who he is as a person, and that very much influences how he interacts with others, be they human or alien. And at first, John gets onto the station, and he's very uncomfortable, and he carries this stigma with him, particularly from the Minbari people. That's a very negative stigma because during the human Minbari War, um, John actually takes out the flagship of the Minbari fleet, and he does it in a way that's very unconventional. And you actually see this scenario play out in the beginning TV movie. What essentially happens is his ship gets very badly damaged. His senior officer, the one that he's stuck with, gets killed, and everybody else there on the bridge is looking to him saying, "Okay, Sheridan, what the heck are we going to do? Engines are pretty much shot. The ship is a wreck, but if we send an SOS out, this Minbari ship is going to come back and finish us off." And John just he contacts the armament section and says, "Do we have any tactical nukes left, tactical nuclear weapons left?" And um, the quartermaster says, "Yeah, we've got a couple left." He's like, "Okay, here's what we're going to do, guys. We're going to mine the asteroid field that we're in with these nukes. We're going to send out the SOS so that we can get rescued, and hopefully this will attract this Minbari cruiser." And what ends up happening is they send out the SOS, and the Minbari cruiser, in fact, does come in to finish them off. They trigger the nukes and destroy the ship. And this very much falls in line with John's military philosophy that he does not believe there is an unbeatable ship, an unbeatable opponent. And this very much carries him through both the Second Shadow War and the Earth Civil War as well. The war against Clark, which I've alluded to before. But the thing about John is he's not a one-dimensional character by any stretch. And this is also obviously very true of all the characters in Babylon 5. But he could have very well been just a one-dimensional character, but he wasn't. He had depth, he had character, and you really empathized with him because numerous times throughout the series, it looks like his goose is going to be cooked. Now, I'm not going to say he has plot armor because he's put in real legitimate danger, and even on a couple of occasions, he is almost knocked off. But as things start to escalate in the Centauri Narn war, he has to be very much a stabilizing element in that conflict. And unfortunately, there are forces at work within that conflict that are beyond Sheridan's knowledge. One of those forces, the primary force, is the Shadows. And Sheridan, he has to step up very much more so, just not just as the commander of Babylon 5, but as a representative of the human race in this galaxy-wide conflict. He's very much a rallying point and a very key figure. And what we find out as the series goes on is that Sheridan is part of a group that was prophesied by Valen. Everything, and it's called the Ones. And this honestly it's a very interesting concept within Minbari prophecy, and it very much ties in into the Second Shadow War. During the two-part episode where Sinclair returns and they go on this mission to send the space station Babylon 4 back in time to be the operation base and everything for the Minbari and all the other races during the First Shadow War. And I've talked about most of this already. But what is talked about is by another side character by the name of Zathras, and is Sheridan asked Zathras, "When you refer to the one you pointed to," and Zathras says, "Delin." And Zathras very quickly but very efficiently explains this idea of the one, because one of the phrases amongst the Rangers is, "We live for the one, we die for the one." And this is a philosophy that very much binds the Rangers in thought, because the one represents the very best among them. And the Rangers obviously were founded by Valen Sinclair, and they have carried on throughout history. But the one began with Valen, with Sinclair. Sinclair was the one who was. He was the beginning of the story, as Zathras says. And I'll put the link to this clip. I'll put a link to the clip and everything in the description so y'all can hear it properly. But Sinclair was the one who was. Delenn is the one who is. She is currently leading the Rangers and everybody else during the Second Shadow War, and Sinclair will be the one to come. He will be the one that carries the Rangers forward into the future and beyond and everything. And eventually, he, as I've talked about when I discussed Susan Ivanova, she becomes the next one. There's actually a term for the one in Minbari, and it's you actually hear in the pilot episode, Ambassador Kosh refers to Sinclair. You figure it's just a Vorlon greeting, but throughout the series you hear this phrase "Until Za," and actually, "Until Za" is a title. Now, I don't know the exact one-to-one correlation between English and Minbari, but basically it means the one. Until Za Valen, until Za Delenn, until Za Sheridan. Delenn the one, Valen the one, Sheridan the one. And John, I would say, of all the leaders during the Earth Civil War, he was the strongest of them. And he very much embodied this idea of the people of Earth that are being oppressed by Clark want to be free. And he's going to do everything in his power to see that the people of Earth and of the entire government and everybody that lives under EarthGov are allowed to be free once again, free of the tyranny of Clark. And you hear him give this very rousing speech towards the end of the Earth Civil War, where he says, "These officers are on these ships. These are your sons, your daughters, and we have come home to set Earth free." And it just grabs at you. And he has this strength of character and just this absolutely, he's going to do everything in his power to set Earth free, to depose Clark, because Clark is corrupt. Clark is honestly, you could say, evil. And Sheridan is very much the polar opposite of him. He believes in justice. He believes in freedom of the people, and he's tired of seeing the people being trodden upon. And it's a rousing, beautiful moment. And even during the Shadow War, Sheridan has his own moments of brilliance, and also his moments where you feel that he's absolutely crushed. And honestly, of all the relationships within Babylon 5, I think one of the most complex and most rousing, there's actually two. And there's the relationship between Sheridan and Kosh, and obviously the relationship between Sheridan and Delenn, which I've talked about when discussing Ambassador Delenn. But here's the interesting thing about the relationship between Kosh and Sheridan. Up until that point, Kosh had not really opened up to very many people on the station, save for Delenn. And Sheridan is actually the first human to have any type of real rapport or real relationship with a Vorlon. And honestly, Sheridan is the one that initiates it. Because up until this point, Sinclair didn't really interact all that much with Kosh. None of the other officers or anybody else, any of the ambassadors, save for Glenn, really interacted with Kosh. But Sheridan took the initiative. He wanted to know more about Ambassador Kosh and about the Vorlons. And over time, you see this rapport and this relationship evolve and develop between Sheridan and Kosh. And Kosh kind of takes on this mentor role with Sheridan. And Sheridan's like, I want to know more about you. And Kosh says in reply, well, can you tell me more about you? And Sheridan's like, do you mean about me personally, about my people? What exactly do you mean? He's like, are you just want an exchange of information, or do you want to know more about me personally? And Kosh is like, you do not understand. And Sheridan's like, okay, and just kind of walks off. And Sheridan's like, no, you know what? I'm not going to give up on this. This is important to me, and I want to know more about the Vorlons. I want to know more about you, Ambassador Kosh. And there's something in Sheridan that Kosh sees that it's never really fully explained or stated. But over time, Kosh and Sheridan um, have these dialogues with one another. And in one particular one, and again, this is one that I'll include a link to in the description. Kosh goes to Sheridan's quarters and says, "Are you ready?" And he's like, "Yeah, okay, I'm ready. Let's go." And they go to a section of the station known as Down Below, and it's one of the areas that not a lot of people uh, populate very much, or there's a lot of through traffic. And Kosh stands by this little bitty hatch off to the side, and Sheridan's like, "Do you want me to go in there?" Kosh is like, "Yes." And Sheridan asks him, "Well, what's in there?" And Kosh says, "A moment of perfect beauty." So Sheridan goes in there and he sees all these robed figures, and you can't really tell if they're human, if they're alien, or what. But you hear this very beautiful. Um, the best way I know to describe it, it's like a when monks gather in a monastery in their main cathedral and they start to do what is known as Gregorian chant. And like I said, I'll include the link to that clip because it is a very beautiful moment in the show. And Sheridan's just sitting in this space surrounded by these monks or whatever, and you hear this just beautiful vocal sound coming out of these robed figures, and it's glorious. It's very mysterious. It's very deep. It's very moving and touching. The chant is, but over time, unfortunately, the war with the Shadows starts to go badly for the Minbari and the other younger races. And Sheridan goes to Kosh and says, "Look, things are going sideways. They're going sideways fast. We need to get all the other races on board if this coalition is going to work." And Kosh is like, "It's not our time yet. There's still too few of us. We aren't ready. It's your time. This is your fight right now." But Sheridan's like, "Look, we need a victory. Any victory, big or small, it doesn't matter." And he's like, "The Vorlons, your people are at least as old as the Shadows, and you have the best chance of getting a win for us. And if can just get one win, that'll motivate everybody else to get on board and say, okay, we have a chance. If the Vorlons can do this, then we can all gather together and we can do this too." And I've alluded to this, but I'll go full on into this part. And Kosh is very resistant to this idea. He's like, "No, won't do it." And Sheridan gets the exchange between Sheridan and Kosh gets very, very heated. And Kosh gets mad. He gets legitimately mad at Sheridan. He gets angry, and it's one of the few times you ever see this happen. It's probably the only time you ever see this happen is you see Kosh um, get physical with someone. And he uses his telekinetic abilities and shoves Sheridan against the wall, slams him hard against it, not so much that he incapacitates him, but to get the impression that he's like, and Kosh says, go, leave, now. And Sheridan gets right in his face and he says, no. He's like, you told me you were going to teach me how to fight legends. Well, you're a legend too, and I'm not going to leave until you agree. And Kosh, the eye socket narrows. He's like, impudent. And Sheridan's like, up yours. And eventually, Kosh has got Sheridan almost like the um, best way to describe it is like almost like a force choke, everything like Vader would do. And Sheridan's like, are you mad enough now? Mad enough to kill me? Because that's the only way I'm going away. And Kosh finally relents and releases him and says, I will do as you ask, but there will be a price. I will not be there when you go to Zahadum. Because this there was another conversation between Kosh and Sheridan says, I'm eventually going to go to Zahadum. I'm going to face the shadows. And Kosh says, I will go with you. I will go with you to Zahadum to face the shadows. But during this other exchange, Kosh says, I will not be there when you go to Zahadum. And Sheridan's like, okay, fine. If that's the trade off, if you not helping me when I go to Zahadum to face the shadows, if you stay here, fine. That's the price I'll pay. And Kosh tells Sheridan, if you go to Zahadum, you will die. And Sheridan's like, fine. If I die, I die. But I'm gonna take them. I'm gonna take as many with them as I can. But Kosh is like, you don't understand. You don't get it. But you will. And the Vorlons do obviously go out. They get the win that the coalition needs against the shadows that they need. And later on, you see Sheridan getting ready to go to bed, and you hear this voiceover conversation between him and Ivanova. And Sheridan's like, I should at least stop by Kosh's quarters and thank him for what they did, at the very least. But Ivanova's like, it's late. Wait, just do it tomorrow. And you see this cutaway, and you see Morden, who's an agent of the Shadows, break into the ambassadorial ring and break into Kosh's quarters. And there's a group of Shadows that come in with him, and the Shadows kill Kosh. And there's this telepathic conversation between John and what he thinks is his dad, but what it actually is, um, it's Kosh um, disguised as Sheridan's father. And Kosh says, he's like, I'm sorry, I hurt you. I was scared. You live as long as I do, and you get used to things. You get to your own way. But he's right. You've got to fight this war your own way. And it's Kosh's way of saying, Sheridan, I'm sorry for what I did to you before. And he's like, I'm sorry I won't be there to help you. And later on, you see a smoking ruin of Kosh's encounter suit because it's been destroyed by the shadows, and Kosh's energy form dissipates and goes through the station and leaves. But what we find out later is that Kosh actually left a part of himself inside of Sheridan. And when the second Vorlon ambassador comes on board, Sheridan orders the security team, including Mr. Garibaldi, and we'll go into Garibaldi later on. Um, when they confront the second Vorlon ambassador, telling him either you leave or we force you to leave, and there's this big fight and everything. And you see this remnant of Kosh's being come out of Sheridan and confront the other Vorlon ambassador, and the two parts of them confront one another and the last bit of caution or anything drives out the other Vorlon investor, Kosh. But Sheridan's heartbroken because he realizes what Kosh finally meant by what he said, I will not be there with you when you go to Zahadum. And eventually Sheridan, he gets desperate. Because one thing we find out later on down the road and everything is that Sheridan's wife had gone on an archaeological expedition to this unknown world, and we find out later that the world was in fact Zahadum. And the expedition wakes up the shadows, and all but Sheridan's wife and Mr. Morden are killed by the shadows. They keep Sheridan's wife alive, and eventually they send her off when the war starts to turn against them to try and distract Sheridan and try to persuade him to come to their side. And Sheridan's wife and everything brings him to Zahadum. And what you see happen is there's a confrontation between Sheridan and the shadows, and he's all bloodied and messed up, and his wife's trying to say, hey, look, there's been a misunderstanding, but all can be forgiven. Just take my hand. But what ends up happening is when Sheridan and his wife go off to Zahadum, the ship that they come in, Sheridan has planted a bunch of nukes inside the ship, and he has it automated to where if he feels like his life's in danger and he's got no other way out, he sets the ship on a collision course with the location he's at. It's actually one of the Shadow's main cities there on Zahadum. And you see Sheridan on his balcony overlooking this vast, just giant pit. And you hear Kosh's voice telling Sheridan to jump, just as his ship is trying, as the ship that Sheridan and Anna come crashing through this dome. And you hear Kosh tell him, jump now, go. And Sheridan listens, and he does jump. But what ends up happening is Sheridan meets this other character who's actually, and I'm going to do a video on this guy and everything because there's not a lot about him, but I think he warrants his own entry here, by the name of Lorien. And he's a member of the first ones. And Lorien and Sheridan have this long philosophical conversation with one another. And eventually Lorien divulges who he really is and what he's capable of doing. And what in fact has happened to Sheridan, because when Sheridan jumped, this is like a 2-mile drop. And Sheridan finally hits bottom, but Lorien keeps him alive, in a manner of speaking. He's between life and death, as Lorien explains it. And Lorien says you have to let go of your old self if you're going to accomplish what still lays ahead of you, because at this point, the war against the second war against the Shadows had kind of reached a stalemate, and Sheridan lets go, and Lorien is able to revive him, and to a limited extent and everything. And Sheridan and Lorien return to Babylon 5 and everything in the aftermath of all this, and everybody's like, holy cow, we heard you were dead. And Sheridan's like, yeah, I kind of did die. And what we find out later on, and this is in the aftermath of the Second Vorlon Ambassador being destroyed. Let's just put it simply. And Lorien tells Delenn that Sheridan's only got X number of years before his body will just simply give out. And he'll live to roughly the age of 60, give or take. And Delenn's like, you can do no more for him? And Lorien's like, no. I can't create life, but I can, with my abilities, I can enhance it and lengthen it. That's all I can do. And eventually, Sheridan's body will just give out and quit. And actually, as I've talked about in Delenn and everything, Delenn's video, her and Sheridan do get married, and they do have a son, and so on. And eventually, Sheridan steps down as an officer in Earth Force and becomes president of the Interplanetary Alliance. And they really messed up his story arc and everything in the fifth season because they kind of cut it short and everything for whatever reason. I don't recall exactly why, but basically, he has a successful run as president. There are obviously a lot of there are issues that come up and everything that he has to resolve, but long story short, Sheridan is remembered as one of the best presidents that the Interplanetary Alliance ever had. And all his stuff that he did uh, back in his career, his part in the Earth-Minbari War, his part in the um, Second War of the Shadows, the Earth Civil War, and so on. And I know this video's gone overly long, but there's so much to talk about with Sheridan, it's kind of hard to encapsulate it in a short video. But I think what I want to leave y'all with in the the my personal opinion of John Sheridan is he was a very driven, a very principled, and a very loyal man. He was loyal to his friends. He was obviously loyal to his family, but he was loyal to his home world as well. He was loyal to Earth. But he was so narrow minded that he did not see the value in other life outside of Earth. And he wanted to leave the galaxy in a better place than he had came into it. And I think honestly Sheridan did so. So anyway, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this and everything discussion on John Sheridan. Like I said, I know this video was overly long. It's probably one of the longest ones I've done thus far. But there was so much to talk about with John. I didn't want to short shrift him. I didn't want to just do a short, brief summary. I wanted to give y'all a good picture of him and what I thought of him personally. So, as always, like my video, share, and subscribe, and by all means, comment if you have anything further you want to add to this discussion. And I'll talk to y'all later.